Well, the passing of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has seen the resurfacing of reflections of the years of violence in the country's townships in the 1980s as well as the 1990s. Joining us now virtually is Dr Richard Pitthouse, who is an international research associate at the University of Connecticut and has written extensively on the South African political history. Good morning, Dr. Pitthouse. Thank you so much for making time for us. Let's start with the reflection of Mangosuthu Buthelezi. When you heard of his passing, did you anticipate that there's going to be a complex response to his passing?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, when anyone passes on, there's the grieving and mourning of their family and the people who've been close to them, which is something that any humane person must take seriously. But there's also the political legacy, and that's been intensely contested for years, although very frequently not on the basis of reason or evidence, just on the basis of force of assertion. But it doesn't matter how passionately or repeatedly someone says something. That doesn't make it true or worth taking seriously. There is evidence, and there's very clear evidence about many aspects of what happened in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm. Let's speak about his most recent past, and a lot of the times he would speak about trying to rebuild the relationship with the ANC. This is now the IFP as well as the ANC. And I remember when I spoke to him, and he said to me that, when I came up with the idea of starting a political party, I got the blessings from O.R. Tambo as well, who said that, sure, go ahead and start this new political party, this new political movement. However, though, there's been this drifting apart between the IFP as well as the ANC, and he had wished before he passes on to rekindle that relationship.
Well, yes, of course it's true that back in the 1950s, Buthelezi and Tambo and others were close and were working together, and that's all true. No one denies that. But there was a real rupture, a real rift in the 1980s, and I think 1986 possibly is a decisive year, although the roots of that rupture certainly go back further. 1986 is the year in which Nkatha starts a new trade union, UWUSA, United Workers Union of South Africa, with funding from the security branch of the police. You can't forget that the police were a key element of repression under apartheid. In the same year, a couple of hundred Nkatha members are taken to northern Namibia to be trained as soldiers, irregular soldiers, by the apartheid military. And when they come back, they are involved in all kinds of violence and a set of massacres, such as the Trust Feeds massacre near Pietermaritzburg. So by 1986, Nkatha is directly supported by and in many ways aligned to the apartheid state, and the breakdown is absolute.
Yeah, and when I ask him about that particular history, the way he characterized it is to say that, listen, as the Zulu Nation and as the IFP, we came under attack from, he says, and he blames the ANC as well for this, but he says that the National Party, the apartheid government, came actually to the aid of the IFP to help train the IFP, not necessarily to attack fellow South Africans and black South Africans at that, but rather to protect the IFP and its members.
You see, this is what I'm saying, is the fact that someone makes an assertion doesn't make it worth taking seriously. We've got to assess our understanding of history based on evidence. If we look at the conduct of people like, say, David Ntombela in Pietermaritzburg, or Mandla Shabalala in Durban, also well known as Thomas Shabalala, there's simply no dispute about the things that happened. There are many people today who lived through that and who have been reflecting on what happened at that time, and even this morning and yesterday. I mean, look at the 7-day war in and around Edenvale in Pietermaritzburg. 80 people killed, 20,000 displaced. That's not self-defense. And, I mean, I've seen it for myself. I was a student at the University of Natal, as it was then in Pietermaritzburg. I've seen with my own eyes David Ntombela's Amabuto coming over the hills, and I saw what they did and the aftermath of it. And I think we can't have a serious debate about history if we just say one person said that, another person said that. We've got to go to the evidence. And the evidence is there. It's widely known.
Yeah. And what does the evidence tell us about the role that the apartheid government played, as well as the IFP, in the Boipatong massacre?
Well, the Boipatong massacre is 1992, 45 people dead. There's no question that that came out of a combined action between the apartheid state and Inkatha. There's no question about that. It's been thoroughly investigated and researched. There's no question about that. It's a matter of historical record. Yeah.
And then, of course, the commission of inquiry that followed. And again, I spoke to F.W. de Klerk about this as well. And he maintains that, listen, there was the commission of inquiry, and the commission of inquiry actually cleared the government from any wrongdoing.
Yeah, look, de Klerk and Buthelezi both make similar arguments, or made similar arguments. They're both no longer with us. To suggest that, okay, first of all, to make technocratic arguments about this thing happened there or that happened there, and to ignore the vast bulk of the evidence that is easily available. But they also tend to say that if things happened, it wasn't at their behest. But if you're the leader of an organization, with de Klerk, you're the head of state, and you don't know what your military and intelligence people are doing, what your police are doing, then at the very, very best, you're a completely incompetent leader. And you still are accountable because those people report to you. I mean, that claim in itself doesn't, let people off the hook.
Yeah. Just a final one as we close off the conversation, Dr. Pitthouse. How do you think Mangosuthu Buthelezi would be remembered with those complexities as well, and considering as also what happened before the TRC, and whether there was any forthcoming? At least I tried to push him to, to apologize, and he said there's absolutely nothing to apologize for. And yes, well, the people who lost their loved ones during the struggles, and especially with the black-on-black violence in Thokoza, as well as Katlohong in Katoras, is that, listen, this is what happened, and those people do deserve closure, but I don't see myself and how I can contribute towards that closure. That's what he told me.
Look, what happened in the 1980s in South Africa has never been taken sufficiently seriously. I mean, we still hear people saying, there was this peaceful transition, and that's because it wasn't white people who were being killed. There's a lot of work for us to do to go back and really understand that period. And there are many, many people who lived through it who are still with us. And we can do a lot more to understand it properly. And, we need to understand that there was two sides fighting for very, very different things. But there were abuses and violence on both sides. Ordinary people were often caught up in this political maelstrom and suffered tremendously. And we've never told the full complexity of that story. But we can't even begin to do that if we simply accept a kind of out-of-hand denial of culpability like the one you've just reported now, as if it were credible. It's simply not credible. But we need to go beyond just looking at the elite players here. We really need to start taking the experiences of ordinary people seriously. And that we haven't done. There's a lot of work to be done to really understand that period in a proper way.
Dr. Pitthouse, thank you so much for your time. Richard Pitthouse there, speaking to us about the history of Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the late prince, rather, of the Zulu nation, and of course the Prime Minister of the Zulu nation.